several weeks this summer, we're looking at how we can live our faith in love. We've talked about, Danny has talked about, just who are these people that we are to love? Who am I? Who is my neighbor? Who is my enemy? Who is in God's kingdom? And we've looked at all of those questions and come to some pretty good conclusions. But the question that keeps coming back to my mind is, so what is love? Exactly what am I supposed to do to love myself? What am I supposed to do to love my neighbor or my enemy? What does this look like? What do I actually do? Today's scripture reading comes from the book 1 Corinthians, and there's a letter of Paul's. He wrote to that church in Corinth because they were having a lot of problems. They actually wrote him a letter or several letters, corresponded with him in some way to say, hey, we're having all these problems. Can't really imagine why they're having all these problems, because Corinth was like, I would imagine building a church, beginning a church in Corinth would be like starting a church in the middle of the French Quarter during Mardi Gras. It was a pretty wild town, to say the least. We had pagan temples with all kinds of things going on that we won't get into at this point, but they struggled. Paul had started his church. He gave them instruction. He showed them what to do, how to do it, and all these things, and yet they still struggled. So they corresponded with Paul and tried to get some further guidance, some further instruction on what to do, and Paul responded with this letter. And in this letter, he talked about those things, how to deal with immorality, how to deal with divisions in the church, how to deal with people suing each other in the pagan courts, and all these things. But most importantly, I think this passage that we're going to look at today brought it all together. Most importantly, what he had to tell them was that you can do all of these things, but without love, it ain't going to work. So hear now these words of Paul. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always preserves. Amen. Well, first of all, I love the fall. I love the fall because the choir is back, and that is so great. Don't realize how much we appreciate them until we miss them all summer, and then they come back, and it's, thank you, Shannon, and all of you in the choir. Golf clap. First of all, disclaimer. If you're expecting me to give you some really powerful insight and some instructions, some ABCs on how to express love, I'm afraid I'm going to let you down. I'm not sure that anyone can. I know that through the ages, I believe that topic has received more attention than any other topic ever. And so far, I have not heard of a single phrase or even short dissertation on how it is that we are to love. It's way, way more complicatedly simple than that. It's like for anyone to explain what love is, it would be like trying to explain who God is. And I don't think you can put either one. In fact, I know you cannot put either one into a box that our little minds can understand. So the best I can hope for is to share some of my experience with love and hope it helps somebody. What I have found is that when our relationships are good, expressing love is easy. We give things that we think the other one likes. We share our time with them. We share in their sorrows. We share our compassion with them. And it all just comes easy. It seems natural. But when it gets rough, when those relationships get rocky, in times of betrayal, in times of conflict, times when people are just being plain stupid, that's when it gets tough. That's when it is very hard to act out of love. And I think it's because it's just not natural. It's not natural for us. Our nature, we're hardwired to defend, to protect. If someone betrays me, if somebody cuts me off in traffic, my first instinct is to get angry because they are threatening me. My first instinct is to react. And hopefully my training in driving overcomes my training in anger, my natural instinct in anger, and I'm able to swerve and avoid that collision, but still my first natural reaction is a bit of anger. It's certainly not love. When somebody says something I don't agree with or doesn't agree with something I say, my first reaction is not love. My first reaction is to defend my point, to defend my pride, my ego. And there's little concern for the other person because I am being attacked. There's no love in that. Too often, love just doesn't stand a chance. And my reactions don't leave that room for love to be able to respond in love. About 3 years ago, well, before I get into this, I just need to make it known that this is not someone else's story. This is my story of discovery about my experience with grace and with love. There are other people involved, but this is not their story. This is my experience with them. About 3 years ago, one of our sons came to live with us. Many of you know him. It's Robbie, Lisa's youngest son. And he came to live with us because he was in a bad way. He'd been struggling for some years. His father had died suddenly when he was, I believe, 16. And Robbie took that pretty hard. And he turned to self-medication, as some of us do. And he continued on that and struggled for several years until he got to a point where he had essentially a full-blown substance use disorder, alcoholism. So life began to catch up with him. Bills began to catch up with him. It came to a point where he needed a place to stay. So he came to stay with us. Begrudgingly, he came to stay with us. There was not much love and there was not much grace in that time. But there was enough of that underlying love that I did the best I could with what I knew. We helped him out. We helped him find a job. I would carry him back and forth to that job. Things started getting better, but we weren't addressing the underlying problem. He wasn't addressing the underlying problem. And it wasn't long until he disappeared for a few days. And we had no idea where he was. His employer, who we connected with Robbie to get him a job, had no idea where he was. She was left in a lurch. A lot of people were depending on him by this time, and he just disappeared. which is something that we often do. So when he finally sobered up and called us, he wanted to come back. And, you know, there is that love there. And that underlying love that you just can't say no. You can't just let him hang out there. So I reacted. I figured out what we needed. We needed some good old-fashioned discipline. So I can still remember that meeting that we had sitting at our table. And I proceeded to tell him my conditions of forgiveness. That's not what I called it, but that's what it was. I was offering him forgiveness. I was offering him conditional forgiveness. And I laid out my conditions. He was to give us his paycheck, and we would give him an allowance out of that paycheck. He would go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings every day, and I would take him there. And he would continue coming to church, being involved in church. And the list went on. Blah, blah, blah. I laid out my conditions of forgiveness. Oddly enough, he agreed to it all. And he started working with those conditions. And I started working with those conditions. And Lord, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of struggle, a lot of effort, a lot of work. It was tough. Because everything I was doing, it was work. But things started to look up. Robbie started to get a hold of what they were talking about in these AA meetings. Seemed to. He was saving money. We knew where he was most of the time. And he even became involved in this church. He was helping with the sound and actually had us streaming on the web at one time. And he was doing a lot of good stuff. And it was working. I was fixing him. My conditional forgiveness was working. If you've never gotten a phone call at 2 a.m., I pray and hope that you never do. Because we got that call again, and Robbie had gone back out. We kind of suspected that something was going on because he had saved enough money and talked us into it, and we let him get a car. Wasn't one of the original terms of forgiveness, but we gave in. Just couldn't come up with a good reason not to. But we got that call at 2 a.m. Thereabout. I don't know why everybody picks 2 a.m., but it sounds good. Middle of the night. And he was in jail. This is DUI number 3. And for those of you who know nothing, and I hope it's most of you who know nothing about the legal system and the progression of penalties for driving under the influence, number 3 is the biggie. Number 3, you're looking at prison time. Number 3 is a felony. It's the end of the world as you know it. So he gave us that call. And of course, Lisa answered. It was her phone. And I'll never forget her response. Give me a call when you get out. And she rolled over and went back to sleep. That was, I cannot imagine how incredibly hard that was for her. I'm convinced it's a God thing. Because the days of jumping out of bed in the middle of the night to go rescue him were over. But more importantly, what that gave me was a pause. Because as soon as the phone rang, I had a bad feeling. As soon as she started talking, it got worse. By the time she hung up, I was pretty angry. I was pretty hurt. I was disappointed. I had just about every negative emotion a person can have coursing through my body. And if he would have been near, it would have been ugly. You know, I'd like to think that at that time, that's when I surrendered Robbie to God, but I can't say that for true. That would not be the truth. Because the truth is, I wrestled most of that night with my need to react. I wrestled with my need to defend, my need to gain some sort of vengeance, some sort of something. Because he had hurt me. He had embarrassed me. He had hurt my girl, the woman I want to spend my life with. He had hurt his employer. He had done all these things. Now he needs to pay. And I wrestled with that most of that night. But that God-inspired pause was my saving grace. Because what it did is it gave me time to let go of those emotions. It gave me time to begin to understand what it means to respond with grace. Because grace does not have conditions. And it certainly does not have the conditions my forgiveness had. So the next day, when he got out and he called, we responded with grace. We didn't make any demands. We didn't lay out any conditions. We just said, do you want help? And he did. He needed help. He had no money. He had no place to go. He was looking at a felony DUI charge. And a public defender. That would have been fun, I'm sure. So we began to help. And my first question from him was, do you want help? And he said, yes. I said, I would suggest that you contact Pine Street Recovery in Fort Worth. They take in indigent care. And he did, and amazingly enough, he got a bed that day, I believe it was, which in itself was a miracle. But he took off. He went there. He took in what they were giving him. He surrendered. He surrendered to God, and God began to work in him. And we just continued to support him in grace. We got some legal help for him. We helped him get into a sober living facility in Denton. And we were just there with no conditions, no demands. We were just there, and we offered the help that we could offer when we could offer it. And we supported him. You know, I really wish I could say that that was all intentional. I really wish I could say that that morning after that phone call that I thought, hey, I'm going to respond in grace. But I didn't. It's like so many other times, I had no other response left. It's almost like the old saying, well, there's nothing left to do but pray. And it's crazy. As I look back at all of this, I have to wonder how many times in my life today I have this same opportunity. And I wonder how many times in my life today I should stand there and say, I am going to respond with grace. I am not going to place demands or conditions on my forgiveness. I am going to help if I can help with no conditions. You know, I don't know how it would have turned out if I would have reacted rather than responded. Don't really care. Don't want to find out. But I do know this. Today, Robbie is beginning to live to his potential. He's an amazing young man. All 4 of our children are amazing young people. They're all very, very intelligent and have an enormous amount of potential to do great things. And Robbie is beginning to live up to that. As I said, we got him into a sober living house in Denton that he found. He did all the research. We just basically toted him there and helped him out to get into it. But he began to go to UNT in Denton. And one of the first things he did when he got there is he started a peer recovery group where other college students who also suffer with substance use disorders could get together and help each other and support each other in recovery. And that group has become nationally recognized. He's become heavily involved and in fact is now employed with an organization called Young People in Recovery, which is a national organization that works primarily with colleges to help them and their students develop these programs of substance use disorder support and recovery. He's been to the White House. It's amazing. He didn't hang out with Barack, but he was at the White House. And to me, the thing I'm most grateful for is, God willing, in May, he'll celebrate 3 years clean and sober and graduate from UNT. And it's just God and his amazing grace when we get out of the way. You know, if we stop when that reaction comes, if we pause when that reaction comes, and just give it just a little bit of time, just give it a little bit of space, so that instead of reacting, we can respond. So instead of acting as emotional beings, we can react, we can respond as sane, sensible people. We can not react and say those things that we can never pull back, but just give that space for God to enter into that situation, for God to do his work. Because as I look back on all of this, during that time where I had that conditional forgiveness, where I was doing all that work and making all those demands, at best, all I was doing was creating enough noise where that small, still voice of God could not be heard. So reflect on these words. Amen.